Thank you. And I'm sorry for the fire alarm. It was all part of the show. I wanted to know how you would act in something that you didn't really expect, because that also kind of happened to me. 7 years ago, I was in love, and I'm still actually in love. And weddings, for people who know this, they work contagious. At least that's how it felt for me, so 7 years ago. I knew Janine was the one, and in 2012, I finally dared to pop the question. What also worked really contagious for me, at least, were the lighted dance floors. At each and every wedding that we went to, there was this lighted dance floor. With every beat, the light would go on. And I don't know why it triggered me, and I also didn't have a lot of influence on the program, to be honest. But there was one thing that was definitely a must-have for me, and that was this lighted dance floor. July 27, 2013 was the date, and it was a beautiful day. And as you can see, the lighted dance floor was there. It was 32 degrees. We were in Belgium. We were in the middle of nowhere. So we were in Belgium. Yeah, that's kind of one and one go together, kind of. And we had a beautiful day. And the day was over, and we were getting ready for the party and for the first dance. And people who know me, they know that my dance moves are a bit rusty, so to say. And so we practiced, Janine and I, we practiced over 2 months in our little apartment in Amsterdam on the floor on these dancing moves. So we were ready, and I was quite nervous. I had sweat on my forehead, my knees were like a bit shaking. I was a bit more nervous than for this talk, or maybe less, I don't know. Anyway, I was really nervous, and we stood there, we were ready. I don't even know what the first move was, but we were ready for the dance. And then, all of a sudden, bang. All power went out. Talking about an unexpected moment. It was a bit like the fire alarm. All power went out. All people were looking at us. There was no music anymore. There was no light. And of course, the lighted dance floor also fell pretty quiet. So, what are you going to do at such a moment? What are you going to do when you cannot count on technology, in this case power, that you normally trust? And I was recently reminded of this very moment, when a little over a year ago there was a power outage in the whole of Brabant, and the Efteling was without power. So what stories can you bring to life without power or without energy? No roller coaster will run. No animatronic will talk to you. And the little boats of the Fata Morgana, or it's actually big boats, but the boats of the Fata Morgana, they come to a standstill. And still, something is there that ensures that the story is still intact. The fairy tale forest, also without any power, is still pretty enchanting. Baron 1898 is really impressive, and the Fata Morgana, also, if all the boats come to a standstill, is way, way, way too scary for our 4-year-old daughter. So, what is it? What is the purpose of technology in creating experiences? And in order to answer that question, I would actually like to go back to a crucial person in the history of the Efteling. Peter Reinders. I hear some people thinking, wasn't that Anton Pieck, the famous illustrator? Maybe he's wrong. No, I'm not wrong. It was actually the combination between the two of them. Peter Reinders, already in 1952, saw that technology would be able to bring a story to life. Technology should never be on the forefront. It should always facilitate the story. Sleeping Beauty is not just a doll that is lying here. No, she's really breathing. And the 1952 technology behind it might be interesting for insiders, but don't think that any child asks itself what kind of technology is behind this. No, for everyone, for every guest, for the audience, for every child, it's really Sleeping Beauty who is living there. Also nowadays, I mean, projection technology enables in the Baron 1898 that the wailing women are kind of coming from the floor as a ghost, and it's projection technology, but the aim is to give you a stronger sense of excitement, and that's really the aim of technology. Well, technological developments nowadays, they develop much faster than in the 50s and 60s, and actually it's quite logical, because they have a great promise in them. They say, or technology says, that technological development will ensure us that all the functional, boring, day-to-day activities, that they're going to go away from our lives. And instead of this time that we need to spend on functional things, we get quality time in return. Washing machines, make sure that you have more family time. Mobile phones, I see some people using them. Make sure that you're still connected. And self-driving cars, they promise to do the same with traveling time. So all traveling with self-driving cars, all traveling time will become quality time. And my question to you actually is, do you believe this? Is technology living up to its promise? And I'm convinced that it doesn't. I'm also pretty convinced that technology itself is not going to make us happy, unfortunately enough. And it's not the technology itself, and also don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we shouldn't go for technological development, but I think we should ask ourselves, what are we going to use technology for? How are we going to interact with technology? Of course, I'm also happy with a washing machine. It gives me more family time. But also me, and I think everyone in the audience actually, you tend to, all the time that is freed up, you tend to fill it with even more day-to-day tasks. While, interestingly enough, for instance, waiting time for theme parks quite important, it feels like wasted time, or it feels like free time. Time where you can update your mother that you're really going to go in this roller coaster. But this waiting time, and we know this from research actually, if you have a little bit of waiting time, the experience will only be stronger. So technological development on functional tasks, that is not going to be the holy grail of happiness. And that's also why I make a clear distinction between the two. On the one hand, yes, of course, you have technology on functional tasks, makes our lives easier, makes sure that you are not removed from an experience. We don't get you out of an experience anymore because it's easy to pay, it's easy to find a way, it's easy to find a dinner reservation at a table. The thing is, it is not going to make any difference because the guest, your audience, your customer is going to expect this anyway from you. And technology will deliver a whole different value if you dare to think beyond the functional tasks. So if you dare to think in a technology and story and emotion. And then technology becomes interesting. If you can use technology and reinforces as a trigger kind of for happiness. And let me illustrate it by an easy example actually. When my brothers and sisters, and myself, gave my mother a brand new camera as a present, she got tears in her eyes. And she didn't get tears in her eyes because this camera had 15.4 megapixel, 20 times zoom, intelligent autofocus, and all the other things that were on the box, and I don't really remember nowadays. No, she got tears in her eyes because there was a little note. And on this little note said that with this camera, she would be better able to capture the happy moments with her children that wouldn't be there without her. So it's actually capturing these moments and bringing them back. This is what my mother makes happy. The technology itself is really second. Back to Peter Reiners, 1952. In 1952, there was no augmented reality. There were also no robots. But he did have a favorite technology. And I'm pretty sure that some of you don't even know what this technology is. The technology is the tape recorder. I see some people like tape recorder. It's Spotify, but different. Really different. But why? Because the tape recorder could bring things to life. Things that normally couldn't talk, could now talk to you. The most famous example is Hollebolle Gijs. The people who don't know him, he eats garbage. And he says, thank you. It's kind of the summary. But also the parrot. And can you imagine that you're a child, 1952, there's 35 hours of television in the Netherlands per week. And you can go to this fairy tale forest where you can parrot to yourself. Well, in those days, technology was able to bring a story to life. And now let's go one step further and see if it can also facilitate any emotion. When the director of the musical asked me, what could robots do on stage? I returned the question and I asked her, what is it in your story that you would like to bring to your audience but are unable to do so now? Only then start to think about what technology you're going to use. Because fundamentally, this is where it starts. It starts with the story you would like to convey. And let me illustrate it by also another example of Max and Moritz. Max and Moritz is a new roller coaster in April. And it's about two boys, and they have all kinds of acts of mischief in this village. And I mean really acts of mischief in this village. And children and mischief is, of course, two hands on the same belly. And I'm also pretty sure this is not proper English, but I think everyone will understand what I mean. And in talking to children, we learned that the old ding-dong ditch, ringing the bell and then running away, that's still an all-time favorite act of mischief. But how do you imitate this feeling? Because I'm pretty sure if you go back to your childhood that you know this feeling. And at least I know it. We always walked from house to school. There was this one house. If you rang this one house, there was this angry woman. And this angry woman, it always felt like she was 1 meter behind the door. So you really had to run away. But how do you imitate this feeling? Because if you just have a button and you press the button and somebody says something, then you don't really feel it's for me. And here you can use technology, today's technology. Because what happens if you press that button and all of a sudden...
The guy with the brown hair and the microphone. One more time and I'm going to get you.
And you hear this. Then you're definitely going to start and run away. But how can you imitate this feeling? And here you can use technology. In doing this, try to take one element out of a story. Interactive stories also can be talked to death. If you're doing that, then you're telling stories. If you want to bring stories to life, you take one element out and let the imagination of your audience or the child do the rest. Example, the binoculars at the Gondoletta pond. If you look through them, you'll see a little dragon. And our daughter Jana looked through them. And at first she was like, Dad, there is a dragon flying above the island. And it was so funny because then she thought of a complete story of her own, that this dragon was living there, was having a fight with the other dragons that live in the Efteling. And it's really the imagination of a child that brings a story to life. Talking about technology, experience, bringing stories to life. In summary, it comes down to 3 things. 1, start with the story you're trying to tell. Only then think of the technology you're going to use. Don't start from augmented reality, but start from the reality you're trying to convey. 2, people make their own stories, so give them room and freedom to do so. 3rd, unfortunately, technology is not going to make us happy by itself, but use technology to trigger moments or to strengthen an emotion. And actually, these 3 lessons bring me back to the wedding. Remember, it was completely dark. Everybody was looking at us. And I was standing there, and the first thing that I did was look to my left and be 100% sure that Janine didn't turn into a bridezilla. And fortunately enough, for me, because I already said yes, it was too late anyway. Fortunately, this was not the case. And it was really funny. It was actually quite an interesting parallel with the fire alarm just 18 minutes ago. Because our guests, they warped themselves into this creativity mode, actually. Accidentally, I ordered 500 candles instead of 50. But this was quite handy now, because that no longer lighted dance floor was now lighted by all the candles that stood around them. One guy brought a guitar and started singing. Others thought there was a lack of bass and solved it by 2 buckets. And fortunately enough, mobile phones were still working. And everybody was Googling their favorite lyric. So we sang actually through the night, deep into the night. The story that we tried to tell on our wedding was the story of love. And the technology of the dance floor was quickly forgotten. There was more than enough imagination in each and every one of our guests to bring this story to life, and I'm sure, because it's 6 years ago and our friends are still talking about it, because everybody had a little aspect of this story, everybody has a vivid memory of it. And of course, Janine and I also. And above all, what I have learned from this is that love doesn't require a lighted dance floor. It requires imagination. Thank you.